Hey guys, sorry it's taking me so long to get to chapter 10, but here we go. So when we read last, Marzana called Green Glass House and wanted to talk to Milo for some reason because this has to do with the kidnapping. So let's find out why. Chapter 10, Milo. I'm so happy to hear from you, Mrs. Pine said with what sounded like genuine delight. Of course, you and Milo were going to try to schedule a game, weren't you? Yes, we were. Marzana let her voice trail off, hoping that would be enough small talk. Just get Milo. I know he's really looking forward to that. Unfortunately, he's at camp this week. He's not back until Sunday. Marzana bit down a noise of frustration. How is he at camp? Doesn't he have school? City schools started summer vacation this week. Oh, that's right. Well, she hesitated, kicking at the leg of her bedside table. It's sort of really important and time sensitive. Is there a way I can call him? Or can you have him call me? Don't ask why. She begged silently. Don't ask why. Please, 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 pretty please. Well, I can call the office there, Mrs. Pine said slowly. I think they really only want campers to make calls in emergencies. She paused. Is it an emergency? Well played, Mrs. P. Well played. Marzana took a deep breath. Sort of. Silence for a moment then. Is it something I can help with? Or Ben, if it's a game question or something like that? Marzana stifled another grunt of irritation. Mrs. Pine would certainly know how to get a hold of the conductor, but would she share that information with Marzana? There was no way that request wouldn't make her curious, but would she be curious enough to bring it up to Marzana's mom, even though, as far as she knew, the two of them hadn't spoken since Christmas? Possibly. Marzana could practically hear it. How to get a hold of the conductor? Let me just see if I can find out. I'll get back to you. Hey, while you're on the phone, I'd love to say hi to your mom. Maybe invite her down for dinner. Is she available? Maybe if Marzana said it was for a school project. But no, the below ground transit, or at least the fact that any part of it was still functional, was a pretty big secret. Mrs. Pine would probably just refuse to tell her. All of which raised an equally difficult point. Even if Marzana and her crew did somehow manage to get in touch with the conductor, what reason was there to think he'd help them? Meanwhile, at the other end of the crackly line, Milo's mom was waiting for an answer. I just wanted to talk to Milo, Marzana said helplessly, voice thick with frustration and the humiliation of not having thought this through at all. Never mind. Goodbye. Just as she was about to replace the receiver, Marzana heard Mrs. Pine speak rapidly. Wait a second, sweetie, don't hang up. Marzana heard a soft tap, Mrs. Pine setting the phone down probably, and then another momentary silence. She rubbed at her prickling eyes. I'm going to have to plan way better before my next attempt at getting information from anyone, she thought. And then Mrs. Pine spoke again. Give me your phone number, Marzana. I'll call and leave a message for Milo, and then he can call you. Marzana's heart leaped. Oh, thank you. She rattled off her phone number. I'm not sure what his schedule's like or when he has free time. Is there any time that definitely won't work for you? I'm here tonight. I leave for school tomorrow at 7 and can be home by 4. I'll be home all evening. Friday afternoon, I'm busy after school. Saturday, I'm not sure, but if I have to, I can be home all day. The other members of the group would just have to find useful things to do without her if that became necessary. I'm writing all that down. Mrs. Pine's pencil scratched away, blending in with the noise of the connection. Okay, got it. No promises, but I'll do my best. Thanks, Mrs. Pine. I really appreciate it. Happy to help. Sure there's nothing else we can do? I'm sure. Don't ask to talk to my mom. Don't ask to talk to my dad. Then have a good night. Come visit us soon. Marzana slumped in relief. She said her goodbyes and hung up, feeling shaky. Dodged a bullet there, she thought. I am not good at improvising. This was helpful to know, though. She'd have to be much better prepared for awkward questions before she wandered into a conversational minefield like that again, which she realized was likely to be tomorrow when Ciro came over. How was she going to explain the sudden arrival of a boy her parents had never heard her mention before? It's a problem for later, she muttered, reaching for her backpack as she glanced at her bedside clock. 20 minutes left until dinner. She sped through her homework, then took the graphic novel they'd bought at Lucky's downstairs to read. She'd just gotten to the point where a teenage math whiz, Cassie Patrick, having just been recruited into the legendary secret crime-fighting syndicate called the Sidlery Knot, arrives for the very first time within view of the crumbling mansion called Cartonfield, the Knot's base of operation, only to witness it exploding in a sudden and blinding fireball when her parents entered the dining room. Well, that's a bummer, Marzana murmured, marking her place with a scrap of paper. Mrs. Hacklebairn went to the sideboard to open a bottle of wine. Marzana? Marzana, her dad called as he headed for the kitchen. What's your poison? Seltzer, if there is any, Marzana said as she dropped the comic under her chair. Honora yanked the door open just as Mr. Hacklebairn reached for the knob. Which is under control, sir. Begging your pardon. Vittles is up in 5. You could sit. She disappeared and reemerged a minute later with Marzana's seltzer, then went back again to retrieve dinner. A wooden trencher carrying an assortment of small, perfectly done flatbread pizzas with different toppings that looked at once mouth-wateringly delicious and totally out of place, being served by a weather-beaten old sailor. As the sailor in question whipped out a gleaming curved mezzaluna knife and proceeded to carve the pizzas into neat slices, the phone rang in the parlor. I'll get it, Mrs. Hacklebairn said, sliding out of her seat and heading for the living room. Please, let it be Nick. A moment later, Marzana's mother reappeared in the doorway with a bemused smile on her face. Marzie, she said, tossing her head back toward the living room. For you, it's Milo Pine. Marzana got up so fast she whacked her knee on the bottom of the table and nearly knocked over her glass. Be right back, or I might be a minute, if that's okay. She meant it. I think he's calling from camp. I can't really ask him to call back. Her mom waved a hand. Take your time. She darted into the living room and picked up the receiver, which lay on an end table by the sofa. Hello? Marzana, it's Milo. Sorry to call at dinner, but the phone was free and I wasn't sure when I'd have a chance again. Mom said you called and it was some kind of emergency? He sounded a little bewildered, which of course he did. In the background, a low hum of kids' voices droned. Marzana caught random snippets, meatloaf, and no way I'm eating that, and something about a jar of fungus that under different circumstances she would definitely have wanted to know more about, but not tonight. Hi, Milo. Marzana twisted the cord. Not prepared, not prepared. Then she remembered 2 things. First, that Milo was not all that much more social than she was. And second, that the best interactions she'd had lately were the ones where she'd skipped trying to make small talk and gone right to the facts. I'm sorry to bug you. She lowered her voice and cupped her hand around the receiver. They shouldn't be able to hear her from the dining room, but better safe than sorry. I need your help. I need to know who your friend who works on the below ground is and how to get in touch with him. The line crackled. Brandon? Milo asked at last, sounding even more dumbfounded than before. Do you know more than one? No, Brandon. Levi is his name. How you get a hold of him, my mom would have known. Why didn't you just ask her? Because I don't want adults involved, Marzana said in a harsh whisper. But Brandon is, okay, because I don't want my adults involved, she corrected herself. There's a thing that's going on, and I think the below ground might be a clue. I'm hoping your friend can help. And you don't want to tell your parents? Milo sounded wary, which was hardly fair considering what he'd gotten up to last winter right under his own parents' noses. They're busy, Marzana said helplessly, and I need this, Milo. I want to do it myself, as much of it as I can anyway. A very, very brief pause. Marzana looked over her shoulder, listening for voices in the dining room. Okay, Milo said, I get it. I'm sure my parents would have his phone number somewhere, but if asking them is out, I can think of 2 other possibilities. I don't know how well either of these will work for you, but here goes. He paused as the cafeteria noise spiked behind him. The first, Milo continued when it quieted again, is that he's a fighter in addition to being a conductor. And he usually talks about taking bouts on Morbid Street down in Shantytown. I'm pretty sure there are a handful of fight houses there, but I also think he's fairly well known. So in theory, you could phone around there and try leaving messages. Marzana groaned inwardly at the prospect of more awkward phone calls, but this at least was doable. Morbid Street fight houses. Got it. What's the second option? The second option is to call him from a station. From a station? Marzana repeated. There's a call system? Yes, I'm not sure if it's the name in each of them, it's the same in each of them, or even really whether they all have one. But this in the station by our house, it looks like a doorbell. Brandon installed them himself, or he's in the process. It's sort of an ongoing project, I think. And even ours doesn't always work. The iron interferes. Weird. Yeah, some stations he can't even get to because of the iron. I don't know what the state of your local one is. Brandon brought somebody here to visit my parents just this past week, Emmett. Just this past week. Emmett, that guy from Christmas. Well, then your station must be functional, so probably there's a call button, but it might not look like much. He paused. Come to think of it, your station might not look like much. They all sort of vanish into their surroundings. Do you know where it is? I guess you can't ask your folks, huh? No, I don't, but I know someone who does. Otomy? Milo said in a questioning tone, like he was trying the word out. I think I've seen that on the old transit map inside our station. Part of it is torn and part of it's water damaged, but I think if I'm picturing it right, that's the name of the one in Liberty. Otomy something? Otomy Street, maybe? He laughed. So all you have to do is find a hidden train station, bust into it, and locate a bell that might or might not be there, then wait for him to show up from wherever else in the city he is. Easy peasy. Piece of cake, Marzana hesitated. It felt like she ought to say something else. In the absence of any better ideas, she settled on the most basic truth. This is helpful. Thank you. You're welcome. Now Milo paused. I don't know what you're up to, he said at last, but I wish I could help. Me too, Marzana admitted. If you weren't at camp, I'd have begged you to come visit for the weekend. Marzana, what's... Another spike of sound behind him. Between that and the crackling connection, Marzana lost track of his voice for a moment. What did you say? I said, Milo repeated, what's going on? She hesitated, lowered her voice even further. A girl was kidnapped. Don't worry, she said quickly, as a sound like a gasp made it down the line. My mom and dad are already on it. I'm trying to help, and they won't let me. Okay, Milo said after a moment. Well then, I hope this does some good. Marzana nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Me too. Brandon's a good guy. If he can help, I bet he will. Hey, what's your address? Hedgelock Court number 230, the Viaduct. Why? No reason. A pause, presumably while Milo wrote it down. Might send you a postcard. Thanks? Marzana glanced over her shoulder again. I better get back to dinner. You too, probably. Milo snorted. It's meatloaf tonight. Why is there always meatloaf at camp? It's the worst. Can't help you there. Yeah, well, good luck. Thanks, you too. She hung up, sprinted up the stairs to her room, and scribbled Brandon Levi, Morbid Street Fight Houses, and Otomy Street into her journal. On her way back to the dining room, she took a detour into the study and pulled a big old atlas from a shelf of similarly antique books. Turning to the index, she searched the O's. There was no listing for Otomy Street. She replaced the atlas and took down the middle book of a 3-volume dictionary. There was Otomy right after the entry for Ottoman Empire. Otomy. Noun. Skeleton. Obsolete. Marzana put the dictionary back and hurried down to rejoin her parents. Her mom pushed the big wooden trencher of pizza toward her place as she sat. How's Milo? Good, Marzana said, taking a pepperoni slice, a pesto and chicken, and one with shaved ham and arugula. Is Honora not eating with us tonight? It was a rhetorical question. Mrs. Hacklebairn always made a point of setting a place for Honora at the table with them, but with very few exceptions, the forced setting had always disappeared by the time the old steward actually served dinner. Nope, Marzana's mom reached for another slice. Noticed your book, she said casually. Marzana stiffened, her toe instinctively finding the graphic novel under her chair. That's the one Peony Hyde was reading, isn't it? Marzana nodded. Well, it's the first book. I think Emmett said she was up to the most recent one. This whole thing reminded me that Nyala's been on me for a while to try the series. She really likes it. Mrs. Hacklebairn nodded as she chewed and swallowed a bite. Well, if anything interesting occurs to you as you read, let us know. Sure. Marzana took a bite too. Maybe the fact that she'd been reading the book in plain sight would make it less suspicious. A question occurred to her. You guys might know this. I was wondering, is a knot a usual name for a team or a gang, or did they come up with that just for this series? It was her father who answered. It comes from Old Thieves' Cant, a sort of secret language of the underworld. That term's been around a long time. What's on your mind? Her mother asked, watching her closely. I was thinking how lonely Peony must have been, Marzana said, entirely truthfully. She'd just lost her best friend, and she was reading a book about a crime-fighting team. They were sending her to camp to try to make new friends. It seemed sad. I hope, suddenly there was a lump in her throat, I hope she's okay, is all. Marzana's mother reached for her left hand, and her father reached for her right. We're going to find her, Mrs. Hacklebaron said. And for the first time, Marzana noticed that the circles perpetually lurking under her mother's eyes were darker than usual. Her mother was worried about this girl that none of them knew too. Marzana glanced at her father and saw the same worry pooling under his eyes, visible even with his much darker skin. Promise? She asked quietly. Her parents looked at each other. Promise, her mother said after a moment. The hesitation was small, but it was enough. You didn't ask promise when you wanted truth. You asked it when you wanted comfort, and parents weren't dumb enough to answer a comfort question with honesty. Marzana took her hands back and ate another bite of pizza, in hopes that it would knock the lump back down again. That night, when the usual knock came on Marzana's door and Honora peeked in with her tray of cider, Marzana was ready. Honora, she asked, accepting the proffered cup. Ooh, proffered, that's a good word. Do you know what that means? Tell me some kinds of knots. Knots, Honora repeated, blinking curiously, meaning tying knots, that sort? Yes, if you please. The old sailor sat down next to her and scratched her grizzled head with one tattooed hand. Well, what are you needing the knot to do? There's knots for all things, but no one knot for all things, if you take my meaning. Matters what you plan to do with it. I'm not actually planning to do anything with it. Marzana picked up her journal, opened to a fresh page and pen. I just need to know names. It's for school. Interesting names, she added as an afterthought. Interesting knots, if possible. Ah, Honora said, in a tone that implied, of course, schoolwork would be frivolous enough to demand one make a list of knots without bothering to know what they were for. Well, then, if that's all, sure, you have a few basic types of knots. Bends, hitches, loops, plaits, sennets, splices, stoppers, running knots, slipped knots, binding knots, whipping knots, that's to keep rope from fraying, decorative ones to pretty things up, but you want some names of specific ones, do you? Marzana was already writing. She nodded without looking up. Yes, if you please. Well, you want a bowline on there, Honora said, looking over Marzana's shoulder at the list she was making. Can't do a day at sea without a bowline. A chain sennet looks right pretty if you care about that. Something like a nice braid. I'm also partial to a good killick hitch. Me, nothing better for attaching a rope to something oddball. Then you've got your highwayman's hitch, your blood loop, and your half-blood knot, your left-hand bowline, and French bowline, and Spanish bowline, and your bowline on a bite. You've got all sorts of butterflies, butterfly bend, butterfly coil, butterfly loop, and there's cat's paw, and cat's shank, and dog's shank, and sheep's shank, and monkey's fist. You see, those sold for key fobs in souvenir shops. And the ones that sound like pubs, the Wall and Crown, the Savoy, the Hunter's Bend, the Square Turk's Head, and the Simple Simon Under. And then, she said nonchalantly, you have your sneaky boots knots, thief knots and grief knots, suitable for sneaky boots girls who might not be telling the whole truth about a thing. Marzana glanced up at Honora, who was leaning with her chin on one fist and her elbow on one knee, looking at her with dark amusement. Marzana wrote sneaky boots neatly on the page, then listed thief knot and grief knot below it. What makes them sneaky boots knots? She asked innocently. They look like reef knot. which is a very common knot everyone knows how to tie if they ain't some sort of whipjack posing as a sailor. She felt her pockets, then looked around. You have a piece of cordage handy? A shoelace, perhaps? Maybe. Marzana hopped down, opening her closet, and rifled through the assorted shoes on the floor, looking for a pair of sneakers that had lately been feeling a bit snug. She stripped the pink shoelace out of one and tossed it to Honora. You know how to tie a reef knot, of course, the steward began. Marzana bit the inside of her mouth, praying Honora didn't look up and spot the ignorance on her face. This was the kind of thing Honora always assumed the daughter of a smuggling captain had to know. But in fact, it was precisely the kind of thing that fell through the cracks when you weren't actually actively preparing your child for life either at sea or on the wrong side of the law. Fortunately, though, Honora didn't wait for confirmation. Left over right, then right over left, she said, taking one end in her left hand, crossing it over, and under the end in her right hand to form a loop. Then she brought the ends back toward each other and crossed the one now in her right hand over, then under the one on the left. Fair it a bit, she said, working the knot into a tighter, more compact shape with her fingertips, and there you are. She held the shoelace up. A wide loop hung from the knot, and two loose ends poked out either side. See how it has 4 legs? 2 legs that become the loop, 2 legs that are ends, and one of each on each side of the knot. Got it. And notice the 2 loose ends are both on the top of the knot, so to speak. To the right and to the left, the loose ends stuck out horizontally above the legs of the loop. Yes. Right. Well, this is a wonderful common knot. If you were a sailor tying your ditty bag shut, you'd most likely tie it with a reef knot. Honora undid the knot and smoothed the shoelace out. But if you were concerned that Jimmy's sticky fingers in the bunk below had been eyeing your antique shoe buckle, what's proven to be lucky over the course of 15 missions, and you wanted to know if he or anyone else had been searching your dunnage for it, then instead of an ordinary old reef knot, you might use a sneaky boots knot to find out, for instance. She looped the cord in her left hand, then threaded one end through the loop. In, out again, over and under and through. Fair it a bit. She tugged the knot into the shape. And see what you have? She lay the knot over her index finger for Marzana's inspection. It looks the same, Marzana said at length, but you tied it totally differently. Because it ain't the same. Honora lay the knot out on her palm, smoothing the 4 legs out to either side. Look again. This isn't a reef knot. It's a thief knot. It took her a minute, but then Marzana spotted it. With the reef knot, both loose ends were on top. This time, the loose end was on top on the right, but on the left-hand side, one of the legs of the loop had the upper spot. I see. The loose ends are in different places. It also isn't as reliable. Honora tugged the loop legs, and the knot slid quite a bit before it tightened, even though she'd already faired it. The grief knot's slipperier yet. A good one for reminding you, knots in before knots out, always. She undid the thief knot and performed an even fiddlier bit of threading to produce a knot that looked like the first 2, only twisted slightly. As with the thief knot, it had a loose end both above and below, though because of the twist to the knot, the 4 legs didn't lie nicely off to either side this time. Honora didn't bother to fair it. She tugged the loop ends once, and the whole thing came easily apart. But then, the point of these knots isn't whether they're reliable. The point is whether your shipmates are. She tied another neat left over right, right over left reef knot. If a sticky fingers is getting into your dunnage when you aren't looking, he's not likely to notice you've used a thief knot to tie your bag shut. He'll see a reef knot because that's what he's expecting, so that's what he'll use to retie your bag, never having noticed the difference, even if the knot falls apart under his fingers like a reef knot never would when he goes to open it. But when you see his reef knot, you'll notice, because you'll know it wasn't the same knot you left. And then you'll know someone has been all up in your dunnage. Savvy? I do, Marzana said, tapping her pen thoughtfully on the page full of knots. That's interesting. Thanks, Honora. This is exactly the kind of thing I need. Welcome, I'm sure, Honora said dryly, getting to her feet with the creak of old knees. She handed Marzana the shoelace. A grief knot? It's also called a what knot sometimes. I always thought that was funny. She closed the door gently after her, leaving Marzana alone with her cider and her shoelace and her list of knots. Her eyes lingered on the 3 names listed under Sneaky Boots knots. Thief knot, grief knot, what knot. She fell asleep, still turning the names over and over in her mind, until they became knots in her dreams, symmetrical, slithering tangles of rope, woven from night, from stars, from the wind that slid through the narrow roads and high-walled alleys of the Liberty, and under the spans of the viaduct, like the water that had never flowed there, but seemed as though it should have, binding Gamerbund and everything in it up into a round monkey's fist. And there the entire district hung, ensnared, until Honora came stumping over the hill with a marlin spike in one hand, grumbling that she'd have been there sooner, but the mister had put the spike away in the wrong bit of the knife block yet again, as if she hadn't told him a dozen times and more exactly where it was meant to go when he was done with it. But instead of taking her marlin spike into the knot to pick it apart herself, she came to stand behind Marzana, who was suddenly there too, staring at the round knot that held her home within it like a pearl in an oyster. As together they watched the slowly spinning knot, Honora braided Marzana's hair with the marlin spike, and her knobby old fingers murmuring, "Knots in before knots out. Chain sinnet looks nice if you care about that." And then, when Marzana's hair was neatly knotted into 6 chain sinnet braids, Honora handed her the marlin spike. "Have at it, Sneaky Boots," she said with a wink. And as Marzana stood there, marlin spike in one hand, staring at the knot and wondering where to begin, her alarm went off, and it was Thursday morning. Yay! The next chapter is chapter 11, called Hooray, Hooray, Hooray! And I will record that soon. Bye!